Verse 26. And so all Israel will be saved. Whew. I've been wanting to get to that for several weeks. Just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. Verse 26. It also says in King James, and so all Israel will be saved. It is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. And so all Israel will be saved. And we're going to try to learn this morning, who are all Israel? And so, and so, and so. Okay, you've been saying, and so. After everything I've said, the word, every word in the, what does the King James say? In verse 26, what's the first couple letters?
So all.
And so all. And so. Here you talk for 20 hours, and so you want to add on to what's been said. And so, in this way, the thus seems thus, and you could put thus. All Israel. Important marker of the continuation of Paul's argument. The phrase has been interpreted primarily in one of three ways. And so, number one, the New Testament church is composed of Jews and Gentiles. Number two, the elect remnant of believer Jews during the present age, the all Israel. So who's the all Israel? Could it be the New Testament church compressed both of the Jews and Gentiles? Number two, the elect remnant of believing Jews during this present age. Or is it the literal ethical nation of Israel? Or number four, every individual Jew who's ever lived? Four statements. All Israel. Does it mean, number one, the New Testament church is composed of, I should ask you that question. The New Testament church is composed of Jews and Gentiles, or is it the elect remnant of believing Jews during this present age? Number three, is it the literal, ethical nation of Israel? Or number four, every individual Jew who've ever lived? There are a whole lot of people that believe that every Jew that's ever lived from the beginning of time will be included in the all. And I don't agree with that, but there are many, many people that do. How do I know? And does the Bible say? It's easy to say yes or no when I'm going to show you how. All Israel will be saved. Now, if you saw that term, all Israel will be saved, wouldn't the average person reading that assume, Bill, that all means all Israel? I mean, obviously. Notice first, Paul does not say might be saved or will be saved. This is not just a possibility, but it is an absolute certainty that all Israel will be saved. And it is so it is to transpire, I want you to remember this, in the future. When the fullness of time has come. When the fullness of time has come, that's when it's going to occur. Also, that literally, the text says all Israel, and the plain reading would take this as indicating all of the nation of Israel. Now, if you stop there, you would think that when the fullness of time comes, all of Israel in the nation is going to be saved. And the answer is yes. Now, all of the nation of Israel is going to be saved. Now follow me. In fact, if you are a new Christian, there ain't none in here. They're all old, right? who is reading the text, and you have not been biased by someone's teaching on this verse, and most of us are biased what we read. Well, that's not what Brother King did. Well, that's not what Brother Sanderson said. Who makes you right? That's not what Brother Bill Bauer speaks. You're probably wondering why give such a lengthy discussion to the topic that seems so obvious on simple reading of the words. It says all Israel. So why don't you just say that and move to verse 27? Right? Why are you spending so much time on verse 1? How did I spend 55 minutes on the word for last week? I don't know. Unfortunately, some commentaries spiritualize this. This phrase, all Israel, and they distort its meaning. They think it's spiritual Israel, or what they interpret to be the church. In my opinion, and I have a good opinion, this interpretation that Israel is the church, our spiritual Israel, is wrong. And I'll take you to task on that. Without going into the technical argument. Now let's go into it, please. To make all Israel anything but literal Israel in this chapter is poor hermeneutics. Shut up, Bill. Be quiet, Bill. Hermeneutics is the science of interpretation. Why do I say that? Remember that context is king in regard to actual interpretation. All Israel. Now I have to understand it in the context that it's written. I have to look at the verse 25, and it says all Israel, but in the context it says when the time of the fullness of time has come. We are not free to interpret terms in any way that we like to interpret them. What is the immediate context of Romans 11:26? What has Paul clearly been discussing in chapters 9, 10, and 11 that we've had all year long? 11 times, counting Romans 11:25, Paul uses specifically the term Israel. How many of those times did Paul refer to Israel as a nation? All of them. Every time Paul mentioned Israel, he mentioned the nation of Israel. So then, when we come to Romans 11:26, for the 11th time, we can assume then that he means literal, the nation of Israel. So there is going to be a nation where all Jews in that nation are going to be saved. Now this is where I've been learning. Why would Paul try to fool us or confuse us by all of a sudden introducing to us a non-literal meaning of Isaiah, of Israel? In other words, this whole time, Paul has said the nation Israel. So when we come to chapter 11, verse 26, he also is talking about the nation of Israel is going to be saved. And so the clear indication is, it indicates that the nation Israel and not the church. So Paul, in fact, has just warned Gentile believers not to be arrogant, not to be conceited, not to be wise in your own estimation, because as God cut off the Jews from the branch and you got grafted in, don't be so high-minded that you don't think that God's going to cut you off. If you start acting like the Jews, guess what? You're going to get cut off. And believe me, we're beginning to act like the Jews, so there's going to come a time that God's going to cut the Gentiles off and resurrect the Jews, and they're going to be over the Gentiles, even though that this is in the physical Israel that's going to come. And so we understand that this statement has to do with some very interesting thoughts. In summary, all Israel in Romans 11:26 means all Israel. Let me summarize. All Israel means all of the nation Israel. Very interesting. The next question is, when will all Israel be saved? Now there is the question. I have a very close friend, Bill, that says that this verse means that there's going to come a time that God is going to save every Jew that's ever been born, whether or not he was saved or not while he was on earth, that God's going to reverse everything and all the Jews are going to be saved. Because that's what it says, all Israel. If we understand that all Israel means the nation Israel. It doesn't say every individual is going to be saved from all past times. Clearly, Paul has given us a clue, for he has just stated that this will not occur until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. In other words, in the same verse, Paul describes the return of Isaiah's Messiah. Therefore, one can reasonably associate the time in which all Israel will be saved when the time of the return of Christ, not the rapture, but the second coming of Christ, when we know from other passages occurred at the end of the Great Tribulation. So at the end of the Great Tribulation, all Israel is going to be saved. This will take place when Christ returns to earth to establish the millennial kingdom centered in Jerusalem. Let me give you a couple of verses. Zechariah chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. Zechariah 12, 8 through 10. Zechariah 13, 1. 14:9, following the Great Tribulation period of Matthew 14. All Israel will be saved. Now we're going to look at the term will be saved. This, the basic meaning of rescuing one from great peril, and here refers to salvation in a spiritual sense, God granting repentance and regeneration. In addition, salvation includes protection, kept alive, preserved, life, healing, and made whole. That's what salvation even does today. How will God bring about the fulfillment of all Israel to be saved? Now, what I want to say is, we are here in 2014. When the fullness of the Gentiles have come, the rapture takes place, part 1, and then we have the tribulation. The fullness of time hasn't finished yet. This is the trib. Because what we know is that Gentiles are going to be saved during the tribulation period. And then when the last Gentile is saved, Jesus is coming back, and that's called the second coming. And at this point, the 1,000-year reign is called the millennial, and there will be all of the nation of Israel will be saved. All Israel, the nation. if Paul has used 10 times and 9 to 10 used the word Israel as a nation, and we come to chapter 11 and he uses the word Israel, he's still meaning the nation. So the nation is going to be saved. All of the nation at this point is going to be saved. Okay, let me explain that. Let's look at the passage in Zechariah that clearly is clearly prophetic and has no identifiable fulfillment in history. It is yet to happen. Zechariah, I believe chapter 12, verses 8 through 10 maybe. God declares, "Awaken, O sword, against my shepherd," God, the Son, the Messiah, that is the shepherd, "and against the man, my associate," one in close, united relationship, "declares the Lord of hosts," God the Father, "strike, or heal, or wound, or slay, or kill, and smite the shepherd, that the sheep may be scattered," dispersion, "and I will turn my hand against this little one," verse 8, "and it will come about in all the